There is an icon in a monastery on a Greek island that has been moved more times than anyone can count. Every time it is found back in the same spot. There is a skull in a French cathedral with a hole through the temple, still on display today, 800 years later. There is a rock off the coast of Ireland where monks once carved 600 steps into a cliff face, using no mortar, no scaffolding, and a Viking raider who arrived meaning to plunder it and left having been baptized instead. 7 places, 1 archangel, built across 5 centuries by people who never met, never spoke the same language, and never saw each other's work. You already know at least one of them. You have almost certainly seen Mont Saint-Michel, one of the most photographed places on Earth. You may have watched Luke Skywalker retreat into exile on a jagged island called Skellig Michael. What you were likely never told is this. Draw a line between them, and it keeps going. Through England, through Italy, through Greece, all the way to a cave beneath an altar in Israel. They had no way to speak to one another across a continent. No shared maps. No compass built for that kind of distance. And yet, the line holds, nearly straight, for 2,600 miles. So is this an accident of geography, repeated 7 times by coincidence? Or is it something else? This is Hidden Halos, stories the saints left behind. The line does not appear on any medieval map. No monk drew it. No pilgrim followed it on foot from one end to the other. It was found centuries later, by accident, by a man who was not even looking for it. In the mid-1960s, a French scholar named Jean Richer was studying the ruins of ancient Greek temples. He noticed something strange. Certain sanctuaries dedicated to the god Apollo did not sit at random. When he drew straight lines between them on a map, the lines lined up with startling precision. Richer gave this idea a name: sacred geography. A few years later, his brother Julien Richer extended the theory. He found that the same line, if drawn further west, did not stop at the edge of Greece. It continued, through the Aegean, across the Mediterranean, over the Alps, through France, across the English Channel, and ended, or began, at a rock off the coast of Ireland. Every point along that extended line, it turned out, was a shrine to the same figure, the Archangel Michael. Historians who study these 7 sites are careful about one thing. There is no evidence that any of the builders planned this. The Irish monks who carved 600 steps into a cliff face in the 6th century never crossed paths with the French bishop who built a monastery on a tidal island 200 years later. They shared a devotion. They did not share a survey. And yet the line holds. Across 2,600 miles, 5 countries, 1 strait and a stretch of open sea, it runs in something close to a straight bearing. In 2016, an astrophysicist named Luca Amendola examined the alignment and described it as a loxodrome, a path that keeps a constant compass direction the entire way, the kind of line a ship's navigator, not a monk with no instruments, would need to plot. How closely the line actually holds to that bearing is still debated among the people who study it. What is not debated is that the sites exist, that they are visitable today, and that Michael's name is on every one of them. There is a legend attached to the shape of the line itself. It runs from northwest to southeast, the same direction, some say, as a sword swung downward. They call it the Sword of St. Michael, the mark left, according to old tradition, when the archangel struck down Satan and cast him from heaven. 7 places sit along that mark. The first one is the hardest to reach of them all, a jagged rock rising out of the Atlantic 12 kilometers off the Irish coast, where a handful of monks once chose to live as close to the edge of the world as they could get. 12 kilometers off the coast of County Kerry. A pyramid of rock rises almost 200 meters straight out of the Atlantic. There is no beach, no harbor to speak of. Just a sheer wall of stone and the sea slamming against it. Most days of the year too rough to land a boat at all. Sometime in the 6th century, a small community of Irish monks decided this was exactly where they wanted to live. They carved roughly 600 steps by hand into the cliff face. No mortar, no scaffolding, just stone fitted against stone. At the top, they built a cluster of huts shaped like upturned beehives, using a technique so precise that rain has never gotten through the walls. Those huts are still standing today. 1,400 years of Atlantic storms have not moved them. Life there was not gentle. The island had no soil to speak of, no fresh water beyond what fell from the sky, and no defense against what arrived from the sea. Beginning in the early 9th century, Viking ships found the monastery. The annals of Innisfallen record one raid in the year 823. The monastery was plundered, and the abbot, a monk named Etkul, was carried off and did not survive what followed. The raids continued for generations. And then, according to local tradition, something changed. In the year 993, a Viking named Olaf Tryggvason was said to have arrived at Skellig Michael intending to raid it like the ships before him. Instead, the story goes, a hermit still living on the rock baptized him. 2 years later, Olaf became king of Norway and led the first efforts to bring Christianity to his country. Whether the story is history or legend passed down by monks who wanted it to be true, no one can say for certain. Even the historians who study Skellig Michael call it, at best, unproven, and quite possibly a tale that grew in the telling. What is certain is that the monks kept building, kept climbing those 600 steps, for another 2 centuries after that. By the late 1100s, they had finally withdrawn to the mainland, driven off not by raiders but by the weather itself. Skellig Michael became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1996. 2 decades later, film crews arrived to shoot scenes for a Star Wars sequel and needed almost no visual effects at all. The island, as it already stood, looked otherworldly enough on its own. It is the westernmost point on the line. From here, the Archangel's name runs east, across the sea, to a second island that looks almost like Skellig Michael's twin. Off the coast of Cornwall, in the far southwest of England, there is a small island that looks at first glance like it should not exist. A steep granite hill rises out of the bay, crowned by a castle and a church, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway of stone. For most of the day, that causeway is underwater. Twice daily, the tide comes in and cuts the island off completely. Twice daily, it recedes, and a path opens across the sand, just long enough for people to walk across before the sea returns to claim it again. According to the tradition kept at the site itself, the island's connection to Michael the Archangel goes back to the 5th century, when local fishermen reported seeing him appear on the summit of the rock. There is no way to verify a claim like that from 1,500 years ago. What can be verified is what came after. By the 12th century, Benedictine monks had built a priory on the site, and it was formally linked, not just in devotion but in ownership, to a monastery across the English Channel that looked almost exactly like it. That monastery was Mont Saint-Michel. The resemblance between the 2 islands is not a coincidence of geography. It is closer to a family relationship. Both are granite outcrops. Both disappear and reappear with the tide. Both are crowned with a church dedicated to the same archangel. Medieval pilgrims sometimes referred to them as a matched pair, one on each side of the water, facing each other across the channel. St. Michael's Mount did not stay quiet through the centuries that followed. During the English Civil War, royalist forces held the island as a stronghold against Cromwell's army, using its natural defenses, the tide itself, as a wall no siege engine could easily cross. Centuries earlier, in 1588, a beacon was lit on its summit to warn of the approaching Spanish Armada. One link in a chain of fires relayed down the English coast. The island passed eventually into private hands, and the same family has lived in the castle on its summit for generations since. Pilgrims still cross the causeway today, timing their walk to the tide the same way visitors did 800 years ago, a rhythm the sea has never once broken. From this mirrored island, the line continues south, across open water, to the coast of Normandy. to the shrine that gave St. Michael's Mount its shape in the first place, and the one story from this journey that you may already know. You already know this shrine, even if you have never called it by name. It is one of the most photographed places on Earth, a Gothic spire rising out of a tidal bay in Normandy, a church built directly onto the peak of a granite island, surrounded, twice a day, by the sea. If you have watched our earlier documentary on Mont Saint-Michel, you know the story behind it. In the 8th century, the Archangel Michael is said to have appeared 3 times to a local bishop named Aubert, ordering him to build a church on the island. Aubert did not believe him. According to the tradition passed down at the site, Michael appeared a 3rd time and pressed a finger into the bishop's skull, leaving a hole through the bone. Aubert began construction soon after. That skull, or what tradition holds is that skull, is still on display today in the treasury of the Basilica of Saint-Gervais in the nearby town of Avranches. A small, unmistakable hole passes through the temple. No one can prove, 8 centuries removed, that the relic is authentic. What is certain is that it has been shown as Aubert's skull for generations, and that pilgrims still stop to see it. Mont Saint-Michel became one of the most visited monuments in Europe. Nearly 3 million people a year make the crossing today, the same crossing pilgrims have made since the 8th century, walking or riding across sand that the tide can still, on the wrong day, take faster than a person can run. For this journey, that story is only a waypoint, because Mont Saint-Michel is not the end of anything. It sits at almost the exact center of the line, flanked in each direction by a shrine most people have never heard of at all. One of those shrines sits high in the Italian Alps, at the top of a staircase lined, quite literally, with the dead. In the Val di Susa, in the mountains west of Turin, a jagged shape breaks the tree line long before you reach it. It does not look from a distance like a church. It looks like something growing directly out of the rock, a fortress the mountain itself decided to build. This is the Sacra di San Michele. It sits at the summit of Monte Pirchiriano, nearly 1,000 meters above the valley floor. The man behind it was a French nobleman named Hugo de Montvoisier. Sometime between 983 and 987, he chose this exact peak to build a monastery. A peak that, whether he understood it or not, sat almost precisely halfway along the line between Mont Saint-Michel and the older, more revered shrine still waiting further south, in Italy's Gargano Peninsula. 2 of the most important sanctuaries dedicated to the Archangel, and Ugo's mountain sits, by measurement, almost exactly between them. Reaching the church requires effort that most medieval pilgrims would have felt in their legs for days afterward. From the entrance, a staircase of 243 stone steps climbs through the rock toward the church above. The monks who built it did not carve it as a passageway alone. For centuries, it doubled as a burial ground. The remains of abbots and benefactors placed along its walls so that anyone climbing toward the altar passed, quite literally, through the company of the dead on the way up. They call it, to this day, the Stairway of the Dead. By the height of its influence in the early 1200s, the Abbey's library and school had earned a reputation that reached across Europe. Nobles making pilgrimage stopped and stayed, often leaving land, buildings, or gold behind them. It was, for a time, one of the most important religious centers in the region. The kind of place where a traveler in a hurry to reach Rome might still choose to lose 3 or 4 days climbing a mountain first. Centuries later, one of those travelers left something else behind. An idea. The Italian novelist Umberto Eco had known the Sacra di San Michele since childhood. When he set out to write a murder mystery inside a medieval monastery, this was the place his imagination kept returning to. The claustrophobic stone corridors, the staircase climbing into darkness, the sense of a building that had been arguing with gravity for 1,000 years and was still, somehow, winning. The novel became The Name of the Rose, and sold more than 50 million copies in 40 languages. Eco never named the Sacra directly in the book. He did not need to. Anyone who has climbed the Stairway of the Dead and stood at the top, breathless, in front of the church door, recognizes it immediately. For architecture, among all the arts, Eco later wrote, is the one that most boldly tries to reproduce in its rhythm the order of the universe. It is a fitting sentence to leave at this exact point on the line, because what comes next is the sentence the line itself seems to be trying to make. Continue south from the Sacra, and the path leads to the oldest of all 7 shrines. The one every other sanctuary on this line, in some sense, was built in imitation of. And it is here, at the far end of that measurement Hugo de Montvoisier may never have known he was making, that the shape of the line stops looking like an accident. If you have watched our earlier documentary on the shrines of Saint Michael, you already know the cave at Monte Gargano, Mo. It is the oldest shrine to the Archangel in the Western world. Older than Mont Saint-Michel, older than Skellig Michael, older than any of the others on this line. The tradition dates to around the year 490. According to the story kept at the sanctuary itself, Michael appeared here and declared, "I am the Archangel Michael, and am always in the presence of God. The cave is sacred to me." Unlike almost every other shrine on earth, this one was never formally consecrated by a bishop. Tradition holds that Michael consecrated it himself, which is why, to this day, no altar dedication ceremony has ever been performed there. The cave simply is, and has been treated as holy ground for over 1,500 years without anyone claiming to have made it so. Pilgrims have been descending into that cave, uninterrupted since the 5th century. Popes have visited it. Crusaders stopped here on their way to the Holy Land, believing that a blessing received in this cave would carry them safely across the sea. In 2011, UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site, one of the last stops on a Lombard pilgrimage route that once stretched across half of Italy. Now here is the detail that changes how you should think about everything you have seen so far on this journey. Measure the straight-line distance between 3 of these 7 shrines. Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, the Sacra di San Michele in the Italian Alps, and this cave at Monte Gargano. And something strange emerges. According to the measurements cited by researchers who study the alignment, the 3 are close to equidistant from one another. Not roughly similar, close to equal. Ugo de Montvoisier built his monastery on Monte Pirchiriano in the 980s. There is no historical record that he owned a survey instrument capable of confirming his mountain's exact distance from a French bishop's church 500 kilometers away, or from a cave in southern Italy he may never have visited. And yet the numbers land where they land. To be clear about what can and cannot be claimed here, there is no scientific evidence that anyone in the medieval period intentionally engineered this spacing. Historians who study the line are candid about that. Some point out that many of these sites, this cave included, sat on ground already considered sacred long before Michael's name was ever attached to it, inherited rather than chosen fresh. Others argue that a spacing this consistent, across sites built centuries apart by people with no way to communicate across that distance, is difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. Both positions are argued today by serious people. Neither has settled the question. What is not in dispute is the shape of what remains. 3 shrines, one older than the others by 5 centuries, standing at almost equal distance from each other across a stretch of Europe no medieval traveler could have crossed in less than a month on foot. From here, the line does not end. It turns east out over open water toward an island where, according to a tradition kept for generations by an entirely different Christian church, an icon of the same archangel has a habit of finding its own way home. The island of Simi sits in the far southeastern corner of the Aegean, closer to the coast of Turkey than to mainland Greece. On its southern tip, tucked into a narrow, pine-covered cove, stands a monastery unlike any of the others on this line. This is Panormitis, the series that explores the hidden treasures of the world, a Greek Orthodox shrine, not a Catholic one. It is a reminder that devotion to Michael the Archangel was never confined to a single church. Long before either name existed, the site is believed to have held a temple to Apollo. What stands there now traces its own origin to a story local to the island itself. According to tradition kept on Simi, the monastery began with a woman named Maria from a village called Protenio, who discovered an icon of the Archangel on this remote stretch of coastline. What happened after, the story goes, happened more than once. The icon was moved to the town, to a church elsewhere on the island, and each time it was found back in this same cove. Eventually, the people of Simi stopped moving it. They built the monastery around it instead. It is, by any honest account, a local legend rather than a documented event. No contemporary record fixes a date to it, but the tradition has held for generations, and it shapes how the monastery is used to this day. Sailors across the Mediterranean developed a custom tied to this place, writing a request on paper, sealing it inside a bottle, and casting it into the sea, from wherever they happen to be. Tradition holds that a bottle thrown with real faith behind it will eventually wash up in this exact cove. Whether that is true in any way that could be measured, no one can say. What can be measured is the museum inside the monastery, where thousands of these bottles are kept, sent from ports the sailors who threw them never expected to reach. There is another custom on Simi that captains still take seriously today. When a ferry engine will not start for no apparent mechanical reason, someone on the loudspeaker will ask, only half joking, whether anyone aboard has made a promise to the Archangel and failed to keep it. More often than the odds should allow, the engine starts again once someone comes forward. This is not the language of Rome. It is not a canonization miracle, weighed by a Vatican tribunal. It is something older and more local than that. A devotion carried by fishermen and island families for centuries, in a tradition that predates any argument about the line itself. And yet the geography does not care which church built which shrine. The line runs directly through this cove regardless. The sixth point on a path that started on a rock in the Atlantic and has one stop left before it reaches land it cannot cross by any bridge or causeway at all. The line reaches its final point at a mountain that was sacred long before any archangel was ever attached to its name. Mount Carmel rises above the modern city of Haifa on the coast of Israel, looking west over the Mediterranean. The same sea that touches every other shrine on this journey, all the way back to the Atlantic cliffs of Skellig Michael. In the Old Testament, this is the mountain where the prophet Elijah is said to have lived in solitude, and where he confronted 450 prophets of the god Baal. Tradition holds that the cave associated with Elijah's vigil lies directly beneath the altar of the monastery built here centuries later. A small stone chamber pilgrims can still descend into today, standing in a space believed to be older than the shrine built around it. That monastery is called Stella Maris, Star of the Sea. It belongs to the Carmelite religious order, whose story begins on this very mountain in the 12th century. When a group of hermits settled here seeking the same solitude Elijah once sought. There is a detail about this place that is often told incorrectly, so it is worth being precise. Many people assume the famous vision connected to Mount Carmel, the one involving the brown scapular, happened on the mountain itself. It did not. The Carmelites who once lived here eventually spread to England, and it was there, at Aylesford, in the year 1251, that a Carmelite leader named Simon Stock reported a vision of the Virgin Mary, holding out a small brown garment. According to the tradition he later shared with his own confessor, she told him, "Receive, my beloved son, this habit of thy order. This shall be to thee and to all Carmelites a privilege, that whosoever dies clothed in this shall never suffer eternal fire." The earliest surviving written account of that vision was not recorded until more than a century after it reportedly happened. Historians who study the Carmelite order are candid about that gap. The devotion built on top of it, however, endured regardless. The brown scapular remains one of the most widely used sacramentals in the Catholic Church today, and Mount Carmel remains the spiritual home the devotion never left, even though the vision itself took place an ocean away. What makes this mountain unusual is not only its place at the end of the line, it is the fact that 4 different faiths consider this ground sacred. Christians, Jews, Muslims, and the Druze all hold Mount Carmel in reverence, each for reasons that predate any of the shrines that came before it on this journey. No other point on the line carries that kind of weight. 2,600 miles behind this mountain sits a rock in the Atlantic where monks once carved 600 steps by hand. Between the two lie 5 more shrines, 5 more centuries, 5 more communities who never spoke to one another and never compared notes. And here, at the edge of the Mediterranean, the line simply stops. Or perhaps, depending on which direction you decide to read it, this is where it begins. An icon that keeps finding its way home. A skull with a hole through it, still resting in a French treasury 8 centuries later. A staircase in the Italian Alps where the dead have kept company with every pilgrim who ever climbed it. 7 shrines, 5 centuries between the oldest and the youngest of them. Not one builder who ever met another. And still, when you draw the line, from a rock in the Atlantic to a cave beneath an altar in Israel, it holds. 2,600 miles nearly straight, running through 5 countries and 2 seas. Historians will tell you, honestly, that there is no proof any of it was planned. They will also tell you they cannot fully explain why it happened anyway. Both things are true at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. Every year, close to 3 million people cross the causeway to Mont Saint-Michel. A much smaller number climb the 600 steps of Skellig Michael, or the 243 steps of the Stairway of the Dead, or descend into the cave beneath Stella Maris. Almost none of them ever visit all 7 in a single lifetime. Maybe that was never the point. Maybe the point was only this, that 7 separate communities in 7 separate centuries each looked up at the same figure and built something that would still be standing when we came looking for it. Have you ever stood in a place and felt, without being able to explain why, that it mattered before you ever arrived? If this story moved you, consider subscribing to Hidden Halos, new documentaries on the lives of the saints, released regularly. This is Hidden Halos, stories the saints left behind.